What do you know? We have affordable houses to look at today. What's happening? Is this Michael Bordonero's channel? We are in Venice, Florida today, guys. Gulf Coast side of Florida, much more affordable than Miami. This house that you guys are looking at right behind me is listed for sale for $420,000. They bought it back in 1996 for only $82,500, and their property tax bill is, wait for it, only $1,689 per year. That's less than my monthly maintenance fee at the condo in Miami. So extremely cheap, very affordable over here compared to Miami anyways. However, that property tax assessment is based on a $134,000 valuation. So it's a guarantee that when someone buys this house for the $400,000 range, that property tax bill is probably going to close to quadruple. So they're probably going to be paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $6,000 a year, maybe $5,000 a year once it gets reassessed. And coincidentally, the house right next door is also for sale by owner, but I don't have any info on it. I didn't see it on the map anywhere of how much they're asking or anything. So we're walking around the neighborhood of where I'm staying over here, just your average neighborhood here in Venice, nothing fancy. You guys are always asking me for this, and today you're gonna get it. And by the way, the reason that you don't get this when I'm in Miami is because if you want houses this cheap in Miami, you're walking through the hood, basically. And it's very dangerous, and I ain't gonna be risking my safety to just make a stupid YouTube video, you know what I mean? So over here, it's totally different. It's just your average Joe neighborhood, nothing scary, nothing crazy. And by the way, this area in Venice, if you take a look at this Redfin chart real quick, is still totally on fire when it comes to the housing market. That's why I'm always telling you guys, it's different everywhere. You know, look at how much they're asking for homes here. The median home price is $496,000, and it's basically at an all-time high. It's had a few hips and dips on the way up, but it is showing no signs of slowing down so far. Seems to be a very robust market here right now. But one place we know it's definitely not as nearly as robust as somewhere like Venice is San Francisco, California. And we're gonna pick on them a little bit today because they just extended the local eviction moratoriums again in California, specifically San Francisco, but some other areas too, which we'll talk about. And the reason I have to bring this up, guys, is because this is insanity. We're talking 3 years after the beginning of the pandemic, and people are still not paying rent in these areas, and the state of California is allowing this to happen. So I guess if you live there, you'll practically never have to pay rent again, is how it's looking right now, because right now they extended this whole eviction ban at least through the summer. So they just keep on extending it and extending it. And in LA, what they did is they made it so that you can't evict somebody based on just having unauthorized pets or unauthorized people staying in the apartment. So they're basically saying, oh, you have a pet in there that you're not supposed to have, it's against the lease, that's a broken lease term, or you're only supposed to have 2 occupants and there's 5, that's a broken lease term. Can't evict somebody for that right now in Los Angeles. That's a recent law that they just passed over there. And you can't evict anyone in San Francisco apparently either. Now we all know that this eviction ban started with the pandemic. They didn't want people being thrown out on the street or actually getting too close to one another for fear of spreading the virus. So there might have been a little bit of a legitimate concern for this in the very beginning. But now, 3 years later, even after all this has been declared over with, they're still using these tactics, but the reason now is different. Now, the state of California is saying, well, we don't want homelessness to go up even more. We already have a massive homeless epidemic here, so we don't want it to get even worse by allowing more people to get evicted right now. Now, many different landlords have sued the state of California, saying that there's no more justification for these rent moratoriums. Obviously, you have people taking advantage of this and not paying the rent on purpose because the state law is on their side, which is just totally criminal, and they're not doing anything about it over there. At least in LA now, you can evict pretty much all the tenants who are failing to make multiple rent payments on time. So at least they're letting you evict people for that. But you know, if they have a dog and they're not supposed to, you can't evict them for that. If there's more people living there than are supposed to, you can't evict them for that. But the problem is in California is, of course, the eviction cases are so backlogged with the court system, which is not a big surprise considering they have allowed this moratorium to go longer than anyone else has in terms of any other state, that some landlords are actually paying the tenants to just leave. Like, get out of my property, I'll give you money just to get out. I mean, how horrible is that? What do you guys think of that? Do you think this is right? Do you think it's right that landlords have to pay unpaying tenants to leave their units that they agreed to rent and pay for, but now they're taking advantage of these, you know, pandemic laws? Let me know what you guys think about it. But now that the eviction moratoriums in LA no longer apply to new unpaid rent payments, for example, there was a woman that couldn't pay her rent, she lost her job, and starting in April, all of the rent payments she missed since April can get her evicted. Prior to April are like forgiven in the sense that she can't be evicted for all the rent payments she missed before April of 2023, but now she can be. And it's estimated right now that the amount of unpaid rent in just Los Angeles alone, guys, we are not talking the state of California, just LA alone, is over $1 billion right now. In San Francisco, they're doing things a little bit differently. Apparently, they have a fund to help people that can't pay the rent, and apparently they have about $24 million still to spend in rental assistance, and that's why they extended this moratorium. So maybe even San Francisco is going to be out of gas pretty soon, because they estimate this will help keep about 3,000 more people in their homes and not get evicted with this $24 million in help. But once that's exhausted, it seems like that's pretty much going to be the end of the road. At least that's how it seems right now. According to what they're saying over there is that even under the eviction ban, tenants are still required to pay back what they owe, but what they're telling landlords is you don't get to collect this debt by evicting people. So they really want to prevent these people from getting evicted. They don't want them to become homeless, but they're telling the landlords that they're still entitled to collect this money. How, guys? How are the landlords going to recoup this money? Let me know how. Because if you can't even process a normal eviction for not paying, the court systems are that backlogged, how long do you think it's going to take, and how much is it going to cost to go through a lawsuit to win a judgment against a tenant who did not pay? And do you think they're actually going to have that money to pay you? If you had somebody that wasn't paying the rent for 3 years and their rent's $3,000 a month, you're talking like $100,000, guys. What tenant is going to come up with $100,000 in a lawsuit where they're required to pay this back? I don't think anyone will, to be quite honest. The reason I also wanted to bring this up today too, guys, is because this is not just a California problem, okay? Depending on where you live in the country, there could still be some degree of protection in place for tenants when it comes to local eviction laws. And those protections, along with $47 billion in federal rental assistance, has kept eviction rates much lower than they usually would be throughout the country. So what this means is you haven't really seen an eviction wave yet when it comes to all the people who haven't been paying rent. The other issue is that different court systems are still taking a lot longer to process evictions than they did before the pandemic, because there are so many cases that have built up. So like in Atlanta, Georgia, for example, right now it's taking on average about 4 months or longer for an eviction case to go to trial. And the county marshal's department over in Atlanta, and they're the ones who enforce evictions, that, you know, the guy that shows up at the door, the sheriff that makes sure that they leave, they're getting about 200 new eviction orders a week right now. And there's anywhere between a 1 to 3 month delay in actually executing these orders. So imagine if you're a landlord in Atlanta, it takes you 4 months to just go to trial and get your case heard and get the eviction order. And then it can take an additional 1 to 3 months for the sheriff to actually knock on the door and get people out who aren't paying. So you could be looking at 6 months probably on average, to evict a non-paying tenant. Imagine the amount of rent that is lost to this. I'm sensitive to both sides of it, you know, being a landlord as well as understanding hardships that tenants go through. But the fact of the matter is, guys, the government is punishing landlords with this, and they're helping tenants. Like, landlords are not getting anything in return for this in most cases, unless, you know, you're in San Francisco and you're one of the lucky landlords that is receiving some of that rental assistance from a tenant who can't pay. But if that's not you, then you're getting nothing besides headaches and a deeper hole in your wallet while waiting for the county to say it's okay to evict an unpaying tenant. So I think what this is going to do is it's going to make it very difficult for people to rent places in the future. Like, if you think it's hard now with having the first month's rent, last month's rent, and security deposit, that's likely to get even tougher and tighter, because landlords are going to be way more selective on who they choose. They're probably going to have minimum credit score requirements, maybe minimum income requirements, which many of them already have, minimum deposit requirements, and different things to eliminate the potential of getting a non-paying tenant in this environment. Because even though it's getting better and finally evictions are moving forward, it's not moving fast enough in many cases, and that's really the big problem with all of this. I just look at it as it seems to be very risky to become a landlord in this environment still, when there's so many places that are trying to still perform evictions and get people out who aren't paying. I wouldn't want to be buying a lot of new investment property right now and taking on new tenants in this environment, just because it feels too risky right now. This house is actually under contract. It's listed for sale for $335,000, but they originally listed it back in December of last year for $379,900. Went through several price cuts, got it down to $335,000 where it is now, and now they finally have it under contract. And the property taxes here are $3,496 a year, so it's quite a bit more than the first house we saw earlier, but still very cheap compared to Miami, and that's based on a $205,000 a year assessment. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you like the video if you're enjoying this so far. In the next video, I'm actually going to talk to my grandparents about how the cost of living in Florida down here has impacted their retirement here. So if that's something you guys are interested in, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, because that'll be the next video you see on my channel. Now, before we get off the eviction topic, I just want to say one more thing. If just in Atlanta alone, 200 new eviction orders are being enforced each week, that is about 800 a month, and that's just in the city of Atlanta. So if this is happening all across the country, where are all these people going to go, guys? When you have an eviction on your record, a new landlord is not going to be renting to you. I know I would never rent to someone who was evicted recently, and it's probably going to increase the homeless problem. It could even end up bringing rental prices down, because if people don't want to rent to tenants who were evicted, then it's going to kind of lower demand for rentals, in the sense that those people are not going to be eligible or qualified to rent new rentals, and the only people who are going to be left to rent those rentals are people who are more well qualified, and in a lot of cases those people can also be potential home buyers too. Just something to think about on how this might impact the housing market. And this is something else that I think is going to impact the housing market too. It turns out, according to a recent report, that American households now are paying an extra $372 a month on average more money this year compared to last year for all sorts of different expenses when it comes to the utilities, rent, groceries, just regular household items that people need to keep the lights on, to keep the household moving, okay? It's costing on average almost $400 a month more today than it did last year. And I'm sure many of you can relate to this. I know I certainly can. I see a lot of my expenses have gone up. I've shared a lot of that with you guys. And I just wonder how long and how many people can absorb this higher cost of living as the new norm. This has been my case for a long time of why I think the housing market could easily come down, because if more people start losing jobs and unemployment creeps up, which it looks like inevitably it will because it is so low right now that there's only one place it can go, and that is up. And given all the circumstances in the economy, it's very likely to continue to go up throughout the year as the recession digs its heels in. But a lot of different industries are seeing pullbacks in spending in different areas. Like McDonald's, for example, is reporting that more and more customers are adding French fries to their order, which I think is a good thing because that's terrible for you anyway. So congratulations on saving the money on the French fries. That's probably a good health move and a financial one. People are buying less mayonnaise at the grocery store. People are also not buying a lot of big ticket items like cars and boats. The sales on those things are going way down because that's not something people need to have all the time. Like you buy a car and you're probably set for like 10 years, right? You don't need to buy another car for a long time. And basically what this report is showing is that people are just knocking down the spending to the essentials right now because of this increase in the amount everyone needs to pay for just the regular cost of living. People are just cutting out things they don't need. I don't need a new car this year. I don't need to have mayonnaise on my sandwich. I don't need French fries with my cheeseburger. Like things like that I think you're just going to continue to see more of because inflation has been sticky, guys. It's not really going away. You still have everything costing 5% more than it did a year ago, according to the CPI, and we know that that number's probably not accurate, and we know that within that number there are items that have gone up more in price than others. That's just an average. Even Warren Buffett now is talking about how he sees a downturn coming in the economy, and this guy's like 150 years old, so I think he's seen a thing or two. He probably has a good measure on when things aren't looking so good right now. Now, the reason that Warren Buffett is predicting a downturn is because he's predicting that earnings to a lot of the companies that Berkshire Hathaway owns are going to see drops in earnings. Right now, the S&P index is on track for a 2.2% annual decline in earnings at the end of March, but the prediction was a 6.7% drop. So actually, things like the S&P are doing better than expected right now. I think the biggest danger for that is that most people are going to look at this and say, there's definitely not going to be a recession. If we've made it through all of this so far, then what recession, guys? Like, it feels like we're unstoppable at this point. But I don't feel that way. I think there's just still too many looming problems that haven't come full circle yet and haven't been resolved, especially when it comes to the banking crisis and the credit crunch. In fact, many small businesses heavily rely on small regional bank financing to just perform their day-to-day operations. And even though most small businesses only employ about 20 people or less, they actually account for 44% of all private sector workers throughout the United States. So almost half of the people who work in this country work for a small business. And if small businesses start struggling when it comes to the availability of credit, what do you guys think that's going to do to unemployment? That's why I think that this whole thing really hasn't been played out yet, because the banking crisis is really just getting started too. We've seen 4 major bank failures in the last couple months. The thing is that on average, a small business only has about $195,000 in debt at any given time. But when you add that up across all the small businesses across the country, that accounts for roughly $18 trillion in small business debt. So that gives you the full scope of just how much small businesses rely on credit and financing from their local regional banks. And if more and more of them continue to shutter or get absorbed by the big lenders, or they just stop lending out of fear of going out of business, this is going to have a major impact on small businesses and likely the employment rate. Because if small businesses can't expand or continue their operation as usual, then the next thing that's going to come, people getting laid off, guys. And we talked about this last week. If more people get laid off, they can't pay the mortgage. I think one of the biggest catalysts of this housing market coming down is going to be unemployment coming within the next year or so. So essentially, that's a forced sale situation that I talk about, because when someone cannot pay the mortgage, then they end up forced to sell the house, whether they want to or not. It's not a choice at that point. And that's pretty much what happened during the last housing downturn, but just the things that got us there were different. You know, it wasn't the same causes of unemployment going up and the same causes of people getting bad loans. But in the end, I think the results are going to be pretty similar. And it turns out that at least 70% of small businesses have some sort of outstanding debt that they use to help cover their operating expenses, like covering payroll, rent, inventory, and being able to invest in new products and equipment, R&D, things like this that small businesses rely on these loans for. And if they can't get the loans, or they can't get as much as they need, that's going to be the number one reason that a lot of small businesses fail. And once again, just like during the pandemic, when we had the shutdowns and a lot of unessential businesses were required to shut down, who got hurt the most? Small businesses. The large corporations were able to weather the storm far better than many small businesses because of the access to capital that they have. And this is kind of the same thing once again, but a different situation. You have big businesses have access to capital from multiple different sources, whereas the small business guy, he's looking at, you know, the bank down the street to give him a loan. If that's not going to be possible, he might not be able to stay in business. So honestly, guys, I think this is where really the next boot is going to drop, is as this credit crunch continues to get larger and more severe. You're just going to see more small businesses letting people go first to try and stay in business, and some of them are going to fail altogether. To put things in this perspective, another reason why defaults got so bad in the last housing crash was, number one, a lot of people were getting loans that they never should have gotten to begin with, that they never were going to be able to pay. So that was a big part of the problem. But during that time, 1.8 million small businesses failed because there was a credit crunch then too. You know, more banks were way less willing to lend out to small businesses, and you had 1.8 million small businesses fail. And you know, if each small business, say they employ 10 people, that's 18 million people without a job that might not be able to pay the mortgage. Now, of course, some people are resilient. They were smart savers. You know, they had money in the bank ready to weather some sort of thing like this, like having an emergency fund that everyone should have. However, not everyone's that smart with money. And those are the people that you saw lose their homes in foreclosure and short sales. And I feel like the same scenario is right around the corner again. You can agree with me, disagree with me, doesn't really matter. I'm just making my case here on my channel. You can make your own channel and make your case if you'd like, but that's the route that I see to this whole thing coming crashing down right now. We also have the M2 money supply shrinking at its fastest pace since 1960, okay? And bank lending has also fallen by the most that it ever has since the Fed started keeping track in 1975, guys. So we have multi-decades worth of data here showing just how bad and severe that this is right now. And go watch my buddy Nick's video over at Reventure Consulting. He made a video recently talking about and showing on a chart every single time we had a drop in M2 money supply, followed by that was a severe depression, guys. And that is just a data-driven thing. That's not my opinion or his opinion. That was just something that happened in the past. And if it happened then, it's pretty likely to happen again this time too. And what this means is that banks are tightening credit even more than they have during past recessions. So if we saw 1.8 million businesses fail in the 2008 financial crash, how many of them are going to fail this time around in the 2023 or 2024 new depression? And a lot of small businesses right now have been reporting that it in fact is harder to get a loan right now, and it's probably going to lead a lot of these companies into bankruptcy. And just remember, guys, the government can't save everybody. You know, they did a couple of bailouts with the first couple of bank failures, but it's estimated that out of the 4,200 banks or so that we have right now, there could be less than half of them left within the next decade or so. So that's how many banks could be looking at failure or mergers right now with other banks because of how bad this situation is. So that's why I think this is really just getting started. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you click the bell notification down below. YouTube will alert you every time I post a new video. And if you don't want to wait, check out my next one on the screen right over here, and I'll see you in the next one.